Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Annie, this is Stanley, and we're here to talk about books. So today is my wrap up for all of the books that I read in April. And April is always a big reading month for me because it's the magical readathon Aurelium spring equinox semester. If you know, you know. Basically it's a reading challenge and there's big prompt requirements in April and September where the magical university classes recommence, and you have to fulfill various different prompts to progress in the subject that you are studying. And I am studying to be a star whisperer, which gave me 5 prompts, but then there's also the Aurelium bog challenge, which I'm doing, and the buzzwordathon covers and titles, and TBR-athon and TBR spin and all sorts of other stuff, but we will get to all of that later. For now, let's make some tea. Here we are once again at the tea drawers. And what does the 20-sided die have in store for me today? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, black violet cream. Oh, this is a favourite of mine. Really does actually smell and taste like violet creams. It's one of the best teas for tasting like it's supposed to and actually living up to the description. Ooh. Yeah, so if you like violet creams, chocolates, I would definitely recommend this tea. I think it's Bird and Blend, which has a lot of good stuff. Good old past me has already boiled the kettle. Have to remember not to overfill this teapot. So I think that'll do. Black violet cream. I shall look forward to that. So now that we've got our tea, let's get to the books. I started off strong. Mostly, actually, I read this in, what would it have been? March. March comes before April in the year. It's going to be that kind of video, Stanley. You'll have to try and keep me on track. But I finished it in April, and that was Fairy Tale by Stephen King, which I picked up in a local charity shop because I thought it looked interesting. I'd read some Stephen King last year and really enjoyed it. And the internet assured me that this was not a scary one. And they were mostly right. This is fulfilling the Apothecary Keeper, which is a side quest extra curricular activity for Aurelium, which is plants on the cover. And it does have trees. So I'm counting it some grass there as well. Anyway, it's about a boy whose name I've forgotten. Charlie, his name is Charlie, who discovers a portal to a fairy realm and goes down into it to try and save his dog, which is very sweet. And mostly, absolutely loved this. I liked the first section, the first third, a lot more than the rest of it, and that was the entirely mundane, no fantastical elements bit of Charlie meeting the dog's original owner and helping him out with chores around his house after he was injured, bonding with the dog, stuff to do with the relationship between Charlie and his father. All of that before we even got to the portal to the fairy realm was absolutely phenomenal. 5 stars. Really, really loved it. Really enjoyed it. And then the middle section dipped quite a bit where he first went into the fairy realm. It did pick up again in the last third. So the middle third was probably 3 stars, and the last third got a bit more exciting, got a bit more involving, got more invested in the characters and the plot. And that would be a 4-star section at the end. So overall, this is a 4-star book, but I really enjoyed this and it's really well written. I was particularly impressed by King's ability to drop in little details that you don't really notice, which are part of the landscape or part of the descriptions, or little tiny things that happen or things that people find along the way that just feel like immersive detail and then turn out to be really significant later on. So you spend the second half of the book going, oh, that's clever, oh, that came back around, oh, I remember that. That was really, really good. Some bits of this were pretty grim, but then I would expect Stephen King to have some grim stuff in a book, but it never tipped over the edge for me, and overall I had a really good time with this. 4 stars. Next up is the family book club book that my dad picked for April, which was Alibi by Sharon Shin, and I was really looking forward to reading this because Sharon Shin has been on and off one of my favourite writers. To be fair, there have been some of her books that I haven't been that keen on, but the Elemental Blessings series I really enjoy. I like the 13 Houses that she wrote as well. And yeah, generally been a fairly solid writer in my reading history. This one felt a bit different because it's modern set in the near future, slightly sci-fi because there's teleportation in the world. It's a murder mystery, which is quite unusual for me and for her, but it was quite useful because there was a murder mystery square on the Reddit Fantasy Bingo board this year, which was to read a murder mystery, and I also got hard mode because the protagonist was not a detective or a private investigator, but sadly, especially for family book club, this was a bit of a disappointment to me. It was quite boring. I'm sad to say. I didn't think the world building was very good. It was one of those sci-fi books where there were a couple of things mentioned, like teleportation and kind of communication devices and stuff, but it didn't really extrapolate how that would affect the world. It was just one change that was dumped into our world and didn't seem to have affected anything, which is not very credible. The characters didn't really feel like real people to me. There was some logical inconsistencies that were very irritating, and I come to Sharon Shin for really in-depth character work and relationships that I can really invest in. I just didn't get that from this. It didn't read like her at all, so I don't know what that's about, but my parents really enjoyed it and I'm delighted that they did. Delighted. I always say, particularly at Family Book Club, I wish I liked things more and I wish I liked more things, and I really do wish I had liked this more, but sadly I didn't. And one of the things, actually going back to the Stephen King, that irritated me was that there were things that were planted early on in the book where instead of it just being part of the story and then it becoming important later and you going, oh, that was clever, oh, that's a callback to this, as they came up I was like, oh, that's going to be important later, oh yes, I can see that, yeah, that's going to come back around and, you know, become significant, and it just felt really clunky. So very sadly, 2 stars. Next up was an audiobook, The Mars House by Natasha Pulley, which was fulfilling my dystopian or utopian prompt from Magical Readathon, and this I think had aspects of both, so I think it was a good choice for that. And yeah, much like the Stephen King, I absolutely loved it to begin with. I was wondering whether it might become a 5-star read for me. It's about a man who lives on Mars and has moved there from Earth, so he is what is called an Earth Stronger, because the people who've been on Mars for generations have grown up and developed in lower gravity, so he is a lot stronger than them, and there are rules about Earth Strongers having to wear these cages that stop them from being dangerous in terms of their strength. It weakens them, and so there's a lot to do with a hierarchical society, oppression of not refugees, well, they are, some of them are refugees because the situation on Earth is not great, like second-class citizens of immigrants, and there's a lot of politics because there's an election coming up on Mars, and one of the main characters is standing for election. But the main thing that really got to me in this was the romance. I finally found it's not a romantasy, it's a romantic sci-fi. I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm making it a thing, that was absolutely written for me. I loved the romance in this. It was so sweet. Despite the rather worrying unequal power dynamics, but the characters themselves actually acknowledge stuff to do with that. I really enjoyed the protagonist, January. I thought his voice was very strong and he was very appealing. It went to some really interesting places that I wasn't expecting. It did drag a bit towards the end and kind of went off the boil a bit, but the ultimate conclusion made me cry and was absolutely wonderful. So overall 4 stars. Not quite as good as I was hoping from the first half, but still a really excellent read all round. Next up, I finally got to The Square of Sevens by Laura Shepherd Robinson, which is a book my brother gave me for Christmas. And thank you very much, David, because this was brilliant. Absolutely loved this. So I had a very strong start. Well, a strong month all the way through. Some ups and downs, but overall I found some really fantastic books. So yeah, The Square of Sevens is about Red, who is a fortune teller's daughter, and after her father dies, she's taken in by a scholar who lives in Bath, and she gets embroiled in high society through her fortune telling using a method called the Square of Sevens. And there's a whole load of stuff to do with a fortune and who's going to inherit it and who Red might be in connection to a very wealthy family that she didn't know about, and all of this kind of stuff. So it's all sort of social politics and inheritances and stuff, but there's a lot to do with fortune telling, which I'm quite interested in as well. Really enjoyed this. It didn't quite make it to 5 stars because it didn't ever really fully engage my emotions. There were some characters that I really loved and terrible things happened to the ones that I liked best, which was a bit of a shame. But Red herself didn't ever really engage my sympathy fully. And it did get a little bit ridiculous towards the end with the twists and turns and the shenanigans and the drama. But overall, really enjoyable, 4.5 stars. Next up was another Christmas present from my brother, but this one was to my husband Dave, and I kind of snaffled it off his TBR shelf because I thought it sounded interesting, and that's The Watermark by Sam Mills, which is about a man who is writing a book and he is struggling, and so he lures various people to his cabin in the woods and traps them in the book, hoping that what they do will inject some new inspiration into the story. And I thought that sounded absolutely up my alley, really very much the kind of book that I liked. But sadly, it didn't work out. I mean, it does have hints of If on a Winter's Night, a Traveller by Italo Calvino, which is one of my all-time favourite books ever. But this is not that, because that has a lot of really interesting things to say about reading and about how people interact with books. And there's more to it just than the hopping between the stories. And this just didn't really seem to have much substance behind it. It was very drawn out. The sections in each story were way too long. I wasn't really interested in the characters. The romance didn't make sense to me at all. It was very repetitive. Yeah, I think I got about 120 pages in and just decided I was going to give up, unfortunately. So that's a bit sad, but we are where we are. And unfortunately, yes, I was going to use it for my illusion prompt for Magical Readathon, which was unusual formatting because it's got different fonts for each of the books, and then it's got like this little comic in the middle and sort of capitalization of stuff at the end. But yeah, so it didn't work out, unfortunately. But what I did instead was a book that ended up being swapped around a lot because I'm taking part in TBR Spin, which is run by Sarah Freshley over on Freshly Read Books, where we have a pile of 12 books that we want to read during the year, and then once a month she spins a spinner wheel to give us a prompt. But this time around, the prompt was to swap out one of the books on the pile with another book that was the same colour. So I'm not sure how I actually feel about TBR Spin at the moment, because the reason that I had the books on the pile was because I wanted to read those books in the year, and we keep getting swapping prompts, but I guess that adds some interest and some randomness to it. So what I did was I picked Half Forgotten Song by Catherine Webb, which was probably the one on the pile that I was least interested in reading, because it's about the Second World War, and I'm kind of a bit over Second World War books, if I'm honest. And I decided that instead of just swapping it back onto my TBR shelf, I'm actually going to unhaul this. And the one that I picked, and bear with me, I picked The Summer That Changed Us by Kathy Bramley. And yes, I know they don't really look like they're the same colour, but they've both got a sky and then some water and then some land. So and gold text across in curly font across the top. So even though the colours don't exactly match, my husband Dave said that if I turn it upside down, it's actually more, but I'm not sure he's right looking at it now. Anyway, this is what I've done. So sue me. So this one's out. Do you want to yeet it, Stanley? We'll have a read it or yeet it moment. Hey, there you go. Thank you very much. Well done. So, the other reason this was useful to me was because in Magical Readathon you can use points that you earn in various ways to buy scrolls, which allow you to change the prompts that you've got. So, I am using a Scroll of Exchange to get rid of Illusion class, which was the unusual formatting, because the Watermark is the only book I've got that had the unusual formatting. And I'm going to swap in the Demonology prompt, which was a book with a house on the cover. I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but there are some little tiny houses. Little tiny houses. And this was also useful because the buzzword cover prompt for April was fashion accessories, so characters that have accessories, and the middle lady in the group is wearing a hat. So very tiny cover elements I'm using for Demonology and the buzzword cover. Anyway, going to the actual book. This is a fairly light, fairly fluffy, what you'd probably call chick lit, but I hate that term, so I don't know why I even said it. It's about three women of quite different ages. One of them's in her 20s, one in her 30s and one in her 40s, who meet on a beach in a seaside town in the north of England, form a fairly instant bond and support each other through the various things that are happening in their lives over the course of a summer. So far, so fairly standard, not particularly interesting, but I don't know what it is about this book. Oh my God, I loved this book so much. Actually, I do know what it is, because I have two friends. I'm in my 40s and I have two friends and we hang out, the three of us. And one of them is in her 30s and one of them is in her 50s. So we're kind of a decade up from the ones in this book, but we have a similar age range. And we met sometime last year and formed a fairly instant bond. And we now support each other through the various things that are happening in our lives. So even though the situations, some of the parts of the situations are quite similar, but a lot of them is completely different. But anyway, just in terms of the vibes, it just really reminded me of me and my friends, and it totally got to me. I really enjoyed the romances. I really enjoyed the female friendships. I really enjoyed the creativity aspects because they collect sea glass and then make things out of it. This book, it was just wonderful. And I finished it, and Dave was in the room, and I kind of clasped it to me, and I was crying, and he went, "Oh my God, did something bad happen?" And I was like, "No." And he said, "Oh, did everybody finish happily?" I was like, "Yes." And I was just in bits. Absolutely a 5-star read. I'm leaning into my vibe focused ratings this year, which I've realised is the way to go, because you don't say this was a 5-star book, you say this was a 5-star read. I'm not sure I could say this was a 5-star book objectively, but it was absolutely a 5-star reading experience for me. Loved it from start to finish. I read it in 2 days. I wish I'd taken longer. Kathy Bramley, now on the list. Will pick up her books when I see them. And now there is another audiobook which I have had on my list for a long time, because it's the 5th in a series, the 5th in the Innkeeper Chronicles series by Ilona Andrews, and that is Sweep of the Heart. And I have really loved this whole series. It's about Dina, who runs a magical inn in an alternative version of Earth, where there's lots of different science fiction races, aliens and vampires and werewolves and wizards, and she runs an inn on Earth which has portals to different planets, and she hosts events for different people from around the galaxy. And it's a really fun series, really enjoyable. I've been looking forward to getting to this one, and it did not disappoint. I loved it. I loved being back in this world. I loved being back with these characters. The inn was hosting an intergalactic spouse selection event, a bit like The Bachelor. And it was just brilliant. I would say perhaps the only issues was there was so many different types of characters and different named characters to keep track of, but I just let it happen. I listened to the audiobook and I just let it happen, and I went along for the ride, and it was a wonderful ride. 5 stars again, 2 5-star books in a row. My only other issue was that I thought this was the end of the series, because this came out in 2022 and there is no other book listed, but it's not the end of the series. I thought I had finished, but I have not. And apparently there is one still to come out, but Ilona Andrews is focusing on a different series. Maybe I should look that up, because I loved this. So, maybe I should read her other books. But I am very much hoping that the last volume of the Innkeeper Chronicles does turn up at some point, because I really need to know what the conclusion to the arc plot is. I need the conclusion to the arc plot, please. But 5-star read for this audiobook. Yay! And then I read Blue Monday by Nikki French, which was another of the magical readathon prompts where I had to find a book with a day of the week in the title. So that was great, because this is the only one I had, but I did have one, so I didn't have to buy a book for it. And this is, I've read a Nikki French book before last year, House of Correction, which I really enjoyed. So when I saw this in a local charity shop, I snapped it up and thought, oh yeah, get round to that one day. It's the first in their Frida Klein series about a character who's a psychotherapist and gets involved in police cases. And it started out being relatively interesting. There were 2 connected cases of child abduction, 22 years apart. Frida gets involved with the case because there are some things which one of her new patients says that raise red flags about whether he might be involved in the case, so she takes it to the police and then ends up helping to investigate. But there were some issues with this book. It didn't feel like the start of a series. It felt like we were dropped right in the middle of Frida's life and all sorts of things. Obviously, she's in her 30s, I think. So yes, obviously she's got a background. But the way that it was written, it felt like we should already have known various things about her. It was like it was several down in the series where you would already be familiar with all of the aspects of her life, because there were various things I was interested in about her family, about her relationships, about her history that just weren't ever really explained. So that was a bit off-putting, and I thought I knew what the twist was going to be, and I was a bit disappointed because it was a massive cliche that I'm just not really interested in. And then it turned out to be a completely different, even more massive cliche, which I was even less interested in. So that was a bit of a shame. But my biggest biggest problem with this book? Let me tell you. It's called Blue Monday. And on the back, the start of the blurb says, Monday, 5-year-old Matthew Faraday is abducted. In the actual book, consistently within the story, to be fair, on multiple occasions, it is mentioned that Matthew Faraday is abducted on a Friday. My professional editor heart shattered into a million pieces when that happened. And I thought there might be some kind of a twist, but there wasn't. It was just wrong. It was just wrong. And that's a fairly big thing to get wrong when the title of the book is Blue Monday and there was nothing to do with Monday in the book because it happened on a Friday. I'm assuming what happened was that the concept for the titles of the series was decided upon quite late in the day after the book had been written and finalised, perhaps, because the first one is Blue Monday, the second one is Tuesday's Gone, and then it goes through, and there are 8 of them. So there's each day of the week, and then the last one's called The Day of the Dead, which I think is quite a clever way of doing a crime series. But you would have thought that the people at Penguin, because this was published by Penguin, quite a big name in the publishing business, somebody might have thought, oh, we'd better check that it actually does happen on a Monday in the book. And they didn't. So, massive points off. I did finish it because I was fair enough engaged enough to want to know what happened in the end, and there was something that happened in the end which really gave me shivers, was very creepy in a very effective way. I did quite like Frida, not enough to want to read more books about her, I don't think, and it was fine, but yeah, that unacceptable to me. 2 stars. But I did have a decent end to my audio listening for the month, which was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison, which I picked because the buzzword title challenge was to have a book with an ordinal in the title, so first, last, second, fifth, something about that. So that fit for that. And also I had to get a magical readathon prompt with time in the title, so First Time Caller. Ticked off both of those very neatly. This has been on my radar for a while. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I'm not generally a massive fan of contemporary romance, especially if it's heterosexual, but this was great. I loved it. It was just such a fun listen. It's about a guy called Aidan who hosts a romance call-in show on the radio, and then a little girl rings up to talk about her mother not having a boyfriend, and then the mother ends up joining the radio show and they plan to find her love, and you can probably see where it's going, but I didn't care that it was predictable. I loved the unusual family dynamics that Lucy, the other protagonist, had with her daughter and her daughter's father. And I loved the guys that worked with her at the mechanic garage where she worked. I loved the other people in the radio station. Aidan and Lucy themselves were both very engaging, which is always useful in this kind of a book. It was just good fun. Really, really solid fun. 4 stars. I actually had some extra time at the end of the month for various reasons, so I ended up giving another couple of books a try, but unfortunately it was a sad end to the month because I listened to just over half of The Bone Maker by Sarah Beth Durst, which is set in a world after the big bad evil has been defeated by a band of heroes, and it's 25 years later and they are moving on with their lives or not, as the case may be with protagonist Kriya, who is trying to collect enough bones to resurrect her husband who was killed in the final battle 25 years before. I don't think I'm gonna read any more by Sarah Beth Durst, which is a shame because I really loved The Spell Shop, but The Enchanted Greenhouse was just okay, and this one felt like it was by a different author. I haven't actually checked, but I think this one is longer ago, was released longer ago, and it was just, I don't know, it wasn't that interesting. I didn't like the characters, I didn't connect to them. And yeah, it started with the protagonist crashing a 7-year-old child's funeral to steal some of her bones, which understandably made the villagers very unhappy with her. And she spends a lot of time at the book on her own, doing not great things. And, you know, resurrection plots, when does that ever end well? And even her husband's not that keen when she brings him back for a very short period. He's tells her that she's got to move on and let him go. And of course she doesn't, because she's obsessed. But it did pick up a bit when some of the other characters came into it and they went on their quest, but it dropped off again very, very quickly. And I just wasn't interested, unfortunately. So I did get just over the halfway point, which made it more annoying in a way, because I felt like I'd invested a lot of time. But I was going to speed it up. I thought I could just speed it up to find out what happens. And then I thought, no, my New Year's resolution was to only listen to media and audiobooks on 1x speed and not to speed it up just to find out what happens. So I decided to stop listening to it, which was a shame because it was going to fulfill the Afterlife Square in Reddit Fantasy Bingo. Although, to be fair, I'm not sure it really did fulfill it, so it's fine. Let's let it go. And I also put onto the April TBR To Walk in the Way of Lions by H. Layton Dixon, which is the middle book of the original Upper Kingdom trilogy, which is set in a post-apocalyptic world. So similar, no, the other one's not post-apocalyptic at all. Don't know what I'm talking about, Stanley, come on. This one, Lions, post-apocalyptic world where humans attempt to survive lots of plagues resulted in hybrids. So the most of the characters that we encounter in the series are anthropomorphic, I can't ever say that, anthropomorphic cats. And it's many hundreds of years after all the humans have died out and they are now the dominant civilization. Although there are others, there are monkey hybrids and dog hybrids and bear hybrids as well that turn up in this book. Anyway, I actually really enjoyed the first book when I read it last year, I think. I wasn't necessarily expecting to because it sounded weird, and it was weird, but it was pretty well written. So I was quite looking forward to this one, and for the most part, I was really enjoying it. There are issues. There's a lot of typos, and that irritates me. As a professional editor, it irritates me when there's a lot of typos. But the main issue I had with it up until quite near the end was that there are many, many sections of the book where characters, it switches a scene. So there's a scene break or a new chapter, and it starts off with just referring to the characters in the scene as he or she, and sometimes goes through the entire section without actually identifying specifically which character it is. And you can generally get it by context, but it sometimes takes quite a long time to figure it out, and it makes it so confusing and very annoying. I tell my authors when I'm editing, don't be afraid to use the characters' names. It often feels when you're writing like you're using the characters' names too often, or that you feel like you should use different ways of describing them, which is another issue with this, because they all have names, obviously, but they often have two parts to their names, so a first name and a surname. They often have titles, and they often also have descriptors as to what type of cat they are. So the protagonist, Kirin Wingard Grey, is sometimes referred to as Kirin, sometimes referred to as Wingard Grey, sometimes referred to as the captain, and sometimes referred to as the lion. And one of the other characters is Fallon Waterford, I think. So sometimes she's Fallon Waterford, sometimes she's the tigress, and sometimes she's the scholar. So that makes it quite difficult to keep track because there's quite a lot of them. But those kinds of things aside, as annoying as they are, I was really enjoying it. I like the characters, the world is really interesting, it's a lot of fun. I was intrigued by where the plot was going from the end of the first book. It was pacey, it was exciting, there were good stakes, but it wasn't, you know, too much in terms of the action. And then about 100 pages from the end, they connected up with some other groups of beings that were tracking them. And it just went off the rails. It was just so suddenly incredibly horrible things were happening to these really cool characters that I liked. And also especially their animal companions. The animal companions do not come out of this book well. If you don't like horrible things happening to animals, do not read this book. And it's not the actual people, the anthropomorphic cats and dogs and bears. It's the horses, it's the birds, it's the ponies. I just couldn't do it. I thought about trying to push through because I was less than 100 pages from the end of the book, just so that I could get to the end of it, and actually largely so that I could tick off the Explorers and Rangers square from Reddit Fantasy Bingo. But no, I'm not going to push through books I'm not enjoying just to tick off challenge squares. I don't want this book on my Reddit Fantasy Bingo board. I don't want it on there. It was just incredibly horrible. And it's such a shame because I was really enjoying the series. I also have a rule that there's no point in me pushing through to get to the end of a book which is part of an ongoing series. If I'm not going to carry on the series, there's no point. So, incredible rambly ranting about these books. It's just a bit of a shame because it's put a dampener on the end of my reading month, because overall it's been a really good reading month. It's been a bit up and down. I think I've been all up and down the rating scale. I'll put some stats on the end of the video in a minute. But yeah, just a bit of a shame to end up with 2 DNFs, especially since I got over halfway through one of them and right near the end of the other one. But I suppose that is the way the reading cookie crumbles sometimes. You know, you got to take the good with the bad. And there were a lot of good books as well. Anyway, so yeah, there we are. So that's my stack. Quite a stack, even though I didn't finish all of these. But yeah, quite a stack for April. Please do let me know in the comments if you also took part in Magical Readathon and which your favourite prompt was and your favourite book that you read because of the Magical Readathon prompts. Otherwise, I hope you're having a wonderful reading month, and I will see you again in another video very soon. Bye for now.